Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Audrey Lewis, Marketing Specialist at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. Both the slides and recording will be made available after the session. Next, please submit your questions so we can answer them live. For any questions that we aren't able to answer live, we'll follow up with you after. Lastly, we have some related resources available for you in the attachments and links section of the platform, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. This is the first session in our 5-part masterclass series on preparing for life beyond the third-party cookie. This series is geared to helping advertising, analytics, and customer experience professionals not only survive, but thrive in the cookieless world. Today, we'll give you a high-level view of how we got here and provide some best practices along the way. In upcoming sessions, we'll take a deeper dive into specific technologies, strategies, and solutions for rebuilding your customer experience playbook around first-party data. Our next masterclass will be on May 5th, and we'll discuss what to do with your data management platform post third-party cookies. You can register for that session or any of the other sessions using the links in the attachment section below. Now on to today's presenters. Jake Spencer is the Director of Product Marketing at Telium. Jake has spent the majority of his career working for enterprise technology brands in all aspects of branding, digital marketing, and web analytics. Travis Cameron runs Telium Partnership Team in the Americas, working with the largest global technology partners like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the leading system integrators and agencies like Accenture, Cognizant, WPP, Omnicom, and Publicis to develop and advance Telium's product as it works together. And with that, let's get started. Jake, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Audrey. And I'm excited to be here. And thank you so much for spending your morning, afternoon, or evening with us. Travis and I are very excited to speak on this topic and kind of go through what we hope will set the stage for the rest of the Masterclass series as we dive a little further into technologies or specific areas where first-party data can help and where data deprecation might be occurring in your organization, how to set up for that. And so we'll take a high-level view today. I want to go over kind of how we got here, why we started this masterclass in the first place, what I see in the market and what you might be seeing and experiencing every day as well. We want to talk about the way forward. There's several different options, but one that we see a lot of our customers starting to take, and we wanted to share some of those thoughts and strategies with you, some specific things that you should be thinking about today, especially as you go over teams and start to talk with teams and technologies and rebuild strategies. What exactly should you be thinking about today? And then going through obstacles that you might face along the way, whether those are internal partner discussions and kind of saying, hey, what tools should I be selecting? What strategy should I be taking? All the way out to preparing managers for some changes in your data and analytics along the way. And then talk finally at the end about the benefits of a first-party data strategy. What we will be doing, either answering questions on the fly if Travis and I can get to it, or we'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. We want to hear questions from you. That's what this masterclass is for. We want to go through and give perspective and share thoughts. And so any questions that you have along the way, please submit them. We will either get to them at the end, or if we can tackle them all along the way, we will do that, and we'll keep an eye out as we go. So let's start with a typical experience that I kind of see going on in the market and kind of where we are at today. And then we'll talk about how we got here. What's really happening that we see is a significant amount of change, and a significant amount of change across teams and technologies and the ways that businesses understand their customers through data. And so you might be able to, or you might in a typical day go and read an email about GDPR because your privacy team is concerned about GDPR and wants to focus a little bit more on GDPR compliance. Your web analyst team and marketers might be concerned about Apple's intelligent tracking prevention or the latest AdWords update from Google. You might be worried if you're on the mobile experience team or a mobile marketer about Apple's IDFA changes expected to hit, or CCPA regulations, and on and on and on it goes as we get to a world where it's really hard to get our arms around all of the changes going on in the market across technologies, across regulatory compliance, across changes in customer expectations. And it really takes us getting a full kind of cross-team approach to go start to get a handle on all of this, because while you as a marketer and as an analytics professional, as a data privacy professional might have knowledge in a specific area, regulatory compliance, browser updates, marketing and measurement, analytics and data, it really is impacting cross-functional teams and really impacting the business, because it's impacting different members of the business in different ways. So what's that look like in a typical day on the email box? It might be a little overwhelming, right? You might open up the cabinet and say, hey, we're going to tackle this head on, and there's just quite a bit going on. And so let's take a step back from where we are and talk about how we got here. A long time ago, we had a web without third-party cookies. It's not uncommon, and we shouldn't fear third-party cookies going away. The sun shined and days went on at one point without third-party cookies, and really browsing the internet was generally the same for everyone across the globe. And as businesses got a little bit more sophisticated with the ways that they targeted advertising, that they collected data, that they went through and personalized experiences, they found that personalized experiences had benefits, but we might go through and have made it almost too personal, right? Where we don't have transparent options for our customers in terms of how we go about collecting data. We don't have transparency and governance over where that data is going. And so ultimately, today's world looks a little different as we've progressed in this ecosystem of tools and technologies and MarTech going about driving customer experiences. Right now, it's estimated that more than 77% of websites use tracking cookies, as well as 82% of all digital advertising, according to eMarketer. And so we've gotten almost ultra personal, and that might be too personal for some customers. And even we see stats on consumers that say, hey, I'm not sure how companies are handling my customer data. 51% of customers and consumers are reporting that they're regularly clearing out their cookies, and 44% of consumers are saying, I'd rather opt out of cookies altogether. Now, we see some customers shifting towards, I want a more private experience. I want to be able to control what data I'm giving to companies about myself. And on the other hand of the coin, we don't see personalization going anywhere either. Consumers are still reporting that 91% of all consumers are more likely to shop with brands that provide offers and recommendations that are relevant to them. 80% are reporting that they're more likely to make a purchase from a brand that provides personalized experiences. And so we get an interesting experience across websites these days as we go through and kind of try to balance personalization and privacy. When you come in, you say, hey, welcome to our website. But first, here's our privacy policy. Make sure you read this, or just go ahead and click past it if it's a little too legal jargon for you. And then also, we'd like your email address. We'd like to keep up with you. And also, did I mention that we use cookies? And also, will you take a look at that pop-up ad and check out this other content that we might have for you, or other product recommendations? And then also, please share this with your friends. And hey, where did you go? It's a really good and I think apt way of how companies have started to handle this balance of personalization and privacy. It's just not quite there. And so we want to talk about the big three, because of those customer shifts and impacts, the big three areas you should be focusing on, or that we're focused on as the market changes, so that it's way less to grab your or put your arms around over what's changing. So the big three, in our opinion, are third-party cookies. Obviously, use cases for measuring and reaching users with third-party cookies will be limited and will continue to decrease over time, especially as browsers that typically are those clients that rely on third-party cookies, or that go and actually allow marketers to use them, start to phase those out. Regulatory changes are also big ones to keep up with, and a reason why we might be not getting as much data about our customers in order to personalize those experiences we wanted to. Keeping pace with the momentum of GDPR, new regulations, especially here in the United States, will continue to impact how data can be collected and used, whether that's CCPA or new laws being passed in Virginia, or new laws being considered over many different states over consumer data privacy and how companies handle data. And then last but not least, browser updates and technologies and how those work. Obviously, a lot of the browsers, Apple, Firefox, and even Google Chrome is going to jump into the mix here in 2022, are going to increase and heighten controls that are impacting traditional data collection, usually the way that we went about going and understanding how customers utilized our website or where they went through after they went and saw an advertisement and start to measure some of those use cases that we used to do. And so those are the big three. And again, like we talked about in the beginning, you might have some legal and privacy teams focused on regulatory changes. You might have web analysts or digital marketers focused on browser updates. You might have a mix of teams focused on third-party cookies going away. And so really, it's this cross-organizational impact that really will go through a customer experience, analytics, marketing, and even your data privacy and legal teams. And Forrester has a name for this. We're going to go and kind of tighten this in a little bit more. They coined this term called data deprecation. And data deprecation is this idea of restricting tracking and access to consumer data due to regulatory browser walled garden or consumer actions. Basically, one word for all of the mess that I just described across all of the different teams, all of the different technologies, all of the different regulations that you might be thinking about or being impacted by. And really, data deprecation comes down and it can impact quite a bit of the experience, the ways that we go and do business as marketers and go and engage our customers and build revenue and drive revenue, on analytics, how we measure the experience and how our platforms and digital properties and advertising is going. Ultimately, it's going to challenge all three of those areas because data is typically how we power those parts of our business. Experience is ultimately is powered by data and the ability to recognize, remember, and recommend things while consumers are on your digital properties. Analytics, obviously the measurement of digital platform activity and the marketing placements that drive traffic will start to have some gaps and some missing visibility as third-party cookies go away. And advertising, ultimately the ability to target customers, prospects, and lookalikes will be significantly diminished. And you can see along some of those use case slides on the bottom as well. Prospect targeting, site retargeting, lookalike targeting. I'm a former digital marketer. That was bread and butter to me. That is what we did in order to go through and drive our own results for our own business through digital marketing. Same thing with analytics, measurement, and reporting and attribution. That's how I went through and said, hey, I'm doing a good job. These ads are working and these campaigns are engaging our customers in the right way. Not to mention audience analysis or lifetime value analysis. And then obviously on the customer experience side, site personalization, A/B testing, persistent logged in states, simple things like that will start to be impacted if we don't start to think about different strategies and shifts. So that's where we're at. And that's, I think, a good overview of how your teams might be impacted. Travis, anything I'm missing on that slide that you wanted to take some time and dive in on a little further before we move on?
No, Jake, I think you've done a great job outlining some of the challenges that everyone is probably facing on the line right now. And I think the one thing I do want to call it, though, is, as you're digging in and working with your teams internally, right, know that some of these challenges are out there and work with them to uncover them. Right? Different teams, different departments are going to be experiencing different aspects of these challenges. It's not going to be one person that's going to be seeing all of it. So you as an organization need to take a step back and look across your entire MarTech, ad tech, data ecosystem and say, hey, where am I starting to see some of these issues from data deprecation or from cookies going away, and begin to plan that as a full organization and not just as a single individual that's saying, I need a solution for media, or as somebody that's in personalization or A/B testing is saying, I need to figure out how to persist this identity or ensure that my tests are still working. This is an organizational problem, and it's something that you need to look to affect across all of your touch points with the consumer. And that's how you need to start thinking about it and addressing it. Back to you, Jake.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis. So what's the way forward? Whether you like it or not, we're here. It's going to impact you. And that's kind of, where a lot of brands find themselves, is kind of saying, hey, we're here and we see the impacts. How do we start to prepare or change our thinking or change our tools and technologies and strategies? And that's what we want to talk about here. So what's the way forward? Well, there's some options. They're not all the best, but there are some options. You can say, hey, we give up. We're going to head back to the way things used to be when I kind of mentioned the personalized internet, and say, I'm going to buy some advertising direct. I'm going to focus on fuzzy measurements or last click attribution. I'm going to go for scale here and start to focus on my brand rather than contextual or personalized experiences. You're going to go through and that is certainly an option. It might not be the most prevalent one in order for you to prove value for your business and go back and say, hey, we're really engaging our customers and building trust with them and lifetime value with them in a way that we want. Because remember, giving up and moving away from personalized experiences is not really what your consumers want either. They want you to balance that personalization and privacy. You could say, hey, we're going to continue to play whack-a-mole here. As browsers change and as technologies update, I'm going to have my Google alerts on. I'm going to keep pace. We're going to hack our way around these things. We're going to constantly change our strategies as browsers change theirs. And two good examples there are, an idea of CNAMing or ad blocking even. As things change and as companies find new ways around these rules and regulations set forth by browsers or by regulatory compliance, they will ultimately catch up. And you might get a couple months or even a year's worth of value off of these hacks and workarounds. But ultimately, that's not a long-term strategy that's going to serve your business. Finally, the one that we think is most prevalent for you to think about is starting to deliver a first-party driven approach. Really saying, hey, I'm going to become channel independent, browser independent. I'm going to start to work in real time and start to build first-party relationships with my customers based on data that they're giving me. I'm going to start to think about collecting every first-party interaction with consent and ultimately be able to rely on more accurate data because what the customer is giving me, because we've built a relationship of trust, is accurate. I'm not working on anonymous third-party cookie audiences that may or may not be accurate. I'm really working on leading with first-party data and supplementing with third-party data where I can. And then last but not least, integrating that data across all of my own channels, marketing and analytics tools to deliver customer-first experiences, balancing personalization and privacy with first-party data. Now, how do you do that? It's going to take strategy and it's going to take technology. And so ultimately, the strategy that we'll dive into is starting to think about upfront consent and value exchange. We've got some examples for you on that along the way. And so I won't spend too much time on that here, but really think about building privacy experiences in a human-centered way and ultimately giving something to your consumers for what they will give back to you, which is information about what they want, how they'll use your products, how you can contact them and stay in touch with them. Improving or thinking about changing the targeting mix. Should I move towards more contextual experience? Should I focus on walled gardens where they might be able to work with some of my first-party data and think about, building and continuing to do retargeting and lookalike modeling and audience suppression, the things that I'm kind of used to in a third-party cookie basis. And then ultimately maximizing first-party data assets. What do I know about my most important customers? What do I go and do with that data? And how can I utilize that across my stack? And then obviously technology will support those strategies. Data collection and orchestration are going to become strategies now, not afterthoughts. How do I collect data? What data am I collecting? What's the use case that I'm collecting this data for? How do I orchestrate that across many tools, technologies, and teams and places where my customer might be engaging with me? Data management and flexibility. How do I ensure that as the market changes, I have tools and technologies that can change along with it so that I can remain adaptive and flexible as these changes kind of shake themselves out. And finally, working in real time and including automation and machine learning. Those are going to be key things to think about. And we'll give you some examples as we go along the way. And also what Travis mentioned is this isn't just a marketing problem. It's not just an analytics problem. It's not just a privacy problem. This is a business issue. So you're going to need to think about these strategies and technologies across channels and teams over time. Obviously, this isn't going to be an overnight change either as you go through and start to build out this first-party approach. But as you do, there will be real benefits along the way of increased trust with your customers, more accurate and reliable data that you're using to drive your campaigns and measure your campaigns, and ultimately building out what we think is kind of a very valuable asset in first-party data. So I'm going to give it over to Travis here in a minute to dive in on these. But given that, we're here. These are the strategies. This is how it's affecting us. What can I start to focus on today? First and foremost, and I mentioned this in the last slide, start to build a durable first-party data core. And we'll talk to you about how to do that and what that looks like. But really starting to think about capturing and integrating durable identifiers in the first-party data in the first party via server-side tools. Really thinking about enabling collection and matching across owned and offline, online and offline systems, and even partner platforms. Start to think about on the marketing side and on the analytics side, adapting some strategies, reducing dependency on cookie-based targeting, evolving the ways of which you work and orchestrate data across sources. And then last but not least, becoming a digital destination. How do I enhance my digital resources and the content that I'm providing my customers in order to provide a personalized experience? And on the other hand, increase the authentication and ability for me to go get data about my customers in a first-party and trusted way. We'll talk further about those three, but Travis, I will pass it off to you to take us through some detail on each of these three steps on what we can do today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. And just a reminder, folks, if you do have questions, please feel free to pop it into that questions chat on the right-hand side. Jake and I are happy to answer any that you might have as we go through this or at the end. So as Jake said, I'm going to take us a little bit in depth, taking that next step forward. And we're going to start here with that idea of data collection and orchestration. And what does that mean, right? Of, hey, this is evolving and this is changing. And back to the history lesson that Jake just walked you through, right? Third-party cookies are really all about identity and data transmission, right? And that is what's starting to be interrupted. So when we say, hey, you now need to look at a first-party data collection and identity strategy, we're basically saying now that cookies are going away, you need to have another means of collecting that data, transmitting that data out to your activation endpoints like a Google, like a Facebook, right? Twitter, Snapchat, any of your MarTech tool stack, right? You still need to be able to get that data to those tools. But first, let's look at how we want to collect it. And when we talk about collection of data, that's really across any of your owned properties or anywhere that you're touching your consumer, right? And then we talk about, hey, how are we moving that forward into the activation of data, as I said. And we feel that there's three key fundamental areas that you need to begin to think about as you're building out the strategy or updating the strategy. First, you want to look at data accuracy and quality, right? Are you capturing the same data that was needed or that is needed to power your activation platforms? Generally, that is going to be now any type of PII, any type of IP addresses, right? That some of your media platforms are using. Two, you're going to want to look at building and owning profiles. So with cookies, a lot of that identity was really owned by your DMP or your DSP, where those profiles or those people were re-identified. You as a brand might have known the cookie ID, but that didn't do you a lot of good if there was only one way of activating that data. Now we're saying you need to be able to start collecting that first party data or the first party first approach to build that audiences and maintain it yourself, because the shift is coming, right? The shift's going from where it was using cookies to activate to now you're onboarding first party data into these publishers or into these MarTech tools to activate on that data. Finally, making data available everywhere. So I kind of referenced this earlier of saying this is a team sport. This is not an individual department. This is not an individual person in your company. When we're talking about these full first party profiles, this is something that every single team inside of your organization should be leveraging and should be contributing data towards to build the greatest profile possible, right? Telium's logo, obviously you see that in the very center. We do all of this and we do help this entire approach for data accuracy and quality, building these own profiles, and then orchestration of that data out to anywhere that you want to look at activating on it. There's two steps that we really see as fundamental in the need as you move into this cookieless world. The first approach, as Jake referenced, moving data collection and distribution server side. So the real need for this is cookies are going away. Tags are still going to be fired across some browsers, but once Chrome makes the change in 2022, they're no longer going to be firing. You need to be able to get data continuously and redundantly back to those analytics platforms, advertising platforms, to make sure you're still able to reach your customer. That's where we look at moving the collection of data from a third-party based vendor to a first-party approach for data collection. We then look to send it server side so that it reduces some of the blockages that could happen, as well as allows you to enrich or unify some of that data, and then distribute through API to these publishers. You see this with Facebook has released their conversion API, one of the first to market to be able to ingest event level data and audience level data server side. Every other major publisher is making that move. And as Audrey said earlier, I have the opportunity that I'm very thankful for to work with many of them in their new approach towards this. At the bottom, you will see consent management. Jake has referenced that a few times. This is going to be something that ongoing is going to be a need of every time you interact with a consumer, that as you're gathering their data, you're also getting their consent to gather their data. And with a lot of things that have happened from a regulatory body, from the browser changes, they being brands in the industry is pushing this back on to you as companies and you as marketers to have the onus of gathering that consent and maintaining that consent chain all the way through to the onboarding into your other MarTech tools and your publishers. Jake and I talk about this all the time, right? He referenced GDPR earlier. One of the big tenets of that was having a data processing agreement. Who's the processor? Who is the controller of data, right? The movement really has been that brands are always going to be the controller of data now. So you need to know exactly what you're collecting, how you're collecting it, and that you have consent attached to that collection. Very important. The next piece that we really look into is also beginning to own this data and building out that durable first-party identity or core, as Jake referenced, right? So we are thinking that there is going to be a shift in some of these internal identity graphs, that instead of it being, oh, we need to be able to attach an email address to as many cookies as possible, now it's going to be about how do I attach as many identifiers or first-party identifiers or zero-party data identifiers that a user has given to me along with their consent that I can use to onboard into different publishers and MarTech platforms. So here in the visual that we're showing you, these are some of the data points that you're going to want to be collecting through web experiences, transactional CRM experiences, what might be in your data lake, in your email, right? This is the profile that we should all be striving towards that provides the 360-degree customer view. But really what it's going to provide is the activation ability across your entire MarTech, ad tech ecosystem going forward. So this is going to be imperative. The ability to have consent along with that is also going to be imperative going forward. And this gives you now the flexibility that once you have this data, no matter what further regulatory changes are coming, browser-based changes are coming, now you have a personal relationship with that customer. And we'll talk now about how to maintain that personal experience once you get that data, because it's not easy and there is a challenge associated with that. So, and that challenge of what we think is that you need to become a digital destination. We know that sounds way easier than it is, but what is the reasoning behind this? Now, when we say become a digital destination, it's about continuing to receive the identifiers and build that relationship and create value, right? And when we say that, look at personalization as an example. Every marketer strives to have website personalization. Personalization is based on the ability to build a profile of that user, re-identify them as they're coming through, and then adjust the experience to them. So that is going to be more and more challenging as we go, because the re-identification part is going to become harder. So how do we continue to build that out, right? One of the pieces that we think is going to be of the utmost importance is to have a strong value exchange and let the consumer know why you're collecting it, right? So here's a great example of one of our clients, Lufthansa, where they are really being direct and upfront of saying, here's why we're collecting the data. Here is the benefit to you. As Jake said, over 90% of customers still want personalization for them, for offers, for recommendations that are to and cater to them. So it's important to communicate that by sharing this data with us as a brand, we are going to continue to provide this value to you. Creating that tailor their experience to push them into agreeing to everything versus only a portion of that. So that is one way to make sure that you're gathering consent upfront. Another way, another great client of Telium's here, ASICs. They understand, hey, somebody only buys a pair of running shoes, every 6 months or every 400 miles run. So how do we maintain that experience with them? We're not going to continually pull somebody back to our website every 5 days so we maintain that first party cookie, right? There's no reason. People don't need to buy that many pairs of shoes. So what can we do? They're very smart, and this aligns very well with their brand goals in that they created their Runkeeper app, right? And for them, that gives value to the consumer that they can begin to log their runs across all of their devices. They begin to understand, how much have I run? What's my average pace? How many activities am I doing? How many calories am I burning? What is my goal that I'm building up to? Maybe it's a 5K, 10K, half marathon, full marathon, right? But it's providing value to the consumer. For ASICs, it's also giving them really valuable data. As I said earlier, right? You might change your shoes every 400 miles. Well, if now all of a sudden you have that being tracked by the company in the app, they can create some amazing personalized advertisements to you when you need it, right? So you might be coming up and saying, hey, I'm starting to feel that wear on my shoes because I'm up to 375 miles. Perfect time to receive an offer in your email inbox about a new shoe that might have just been released or an offer that they have. So these are some of the ideas that we wanted to share with you about how to become that digital destination to share data. Obviously, work with your internal teams, work with your partner networks to figure out what is going to work for you. As not all brands are made equal, and not all consumers are made equal with the value that they're looking for from you. But this is just a great example that we wanted to share. The third area that Jake mentioned, right? Adopting media and analytics strategies that are going to be changeable over time. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we're going to recommend is communicating early and often around the changes that are happening and making sure that your organization and specifically your executive teams are ready for changing reports, right? Because things are not going to look the same as they did a year ago when you're reporting and dashboarding up to them, right? And so for all of you on the line today, we want to make sure that you do have that flexibility and that you've given them enough awareness and enough for time to be able to think of it and prepare for it so it doesn't come as a huge shock to them where they're going to be like, why did my return on ad spend drop 100%, right? You can let them know now that these changes are coming and to begin to educate them specifically around some of the areas that Jake mentioned, right? And the adaptation of what's going on from a media suppression perspective, from retargeting, lookalike modeling, right? These things are all going to be adjusting. We have some solutions as we talked about earlier, but if you don't have them implemented as of yet, be sure to communicate that internally. Make sure that you're getting budgets to allocate against some of these challenges. Relook at the partners that you're using and do they have a way of supporting you through these adjustments and through these changes, right? As I said earlier, we were partnered with Facebook to build out their conversions API, which is a great way that they've said, hey, we now have a redundant way of accepting a lot of this data. And we have got clients that are seeing great results with it. We know that many of the other publishers are currently working on their versions of it as well to continue to power these use cases that, as Jake, to coin Jake, bread and butter of what he used to do as a digital marketer. We also think that this allows you to future-proof what you're going to be doing from a performance measurement approach, right? And simplifying the way that you look at this is going to become very important, right? As some of these adjustments have happened, we've seen that brands or publishers rather have been pushing brands to look at a maximum of 7 different conversion type of events that you're reporting on. So you might not be able to report on or might not have a need to report on everything under the sun that happens on a digital property anymore. It allows you to simplify and focus your internal teams on what matters most and what is going to be most impactful for your business. The final point here, improving owned channels. So can't stress this enough, back to the idea of having that durable first-party data core, that is going to have the most effect on your own channels. Think of that as, maybe email, maybe your call center, maybe even your sales reps being able to communicate with people. That is going to become really important that you're able to share the data that you still know about them with those other channels, and being able to continue to do personalization and get the boost of having better data and cross-organizational data to power that. The other piece that I want to mention, analytics strategies, right? So, analytics is going to be tough, and specifically that movement away from DMPs. And this is something that Jake and I chat a lot about, is what is the future there, right? It's not going to be operating the same way as it used to, right? We've seen some of the biggest companies in the world kind of move away from selling it right now. Salesforce, as an example, is kind of retiring Crux. Adobe isn't talking about AAM as much, right? We're seeing some of these adjustments hit the market without brands coming out and explicitly saying it. Be prepared, prepare your first party data to go into walled gardens. So in speaking with a lot of our clients, they are saying there is refuge behind these walled gardens, right? We're continuing to put more money into that because we know that they're coming up with ways to combat third-party cookies being removed. So make sure you're talking to your partners and your reps about this, because it is going to become difficult, and you might need to reduce the amount of ad tech platforms that you're using or where those dollars are being spent to become most efficient. 3, begin looking into partnerships with clean rooms, co-ops, right? There's a lot of different ones that are going on out there. So as an organization, you're going to want to do your own research on this, right? Continue to stay on top of what some of these changes look like. What's going on with Flock, what's going on with Trade Desk Unified ID, what's going on with LiveRamp, how are these working, right? Where does the benefit to me go? And I think specifically our recommendation to brands is know where your power is with these other vendors, right? There is going to be a movement that whole idea of leveraging a DMP or something like that to get one email address into many is going to change, because there isn't a million cookies about me as a user that are floating out there in the web now. I consistently, personally, have only used 2 email addresses for probably the past 5 years. I've had a single phone number. I've had 2 different addresses. So there are different ways that perhaps publishers or brands might identify as me, but there isn't getting to the 50 cookies that did represent Travis across multiple devices. Now there's 2 to 3. So when you start to look at that, there might be other partnerships that you can do with brands directly, not even involving some ad tech out there, to get additional value. But that comes back to needing to have that durable first-party data core to do matching with them on. So think about that. And that goes into the next point. What's old is new again. The idea of a second-party data co-op of these clean rooms have been around for a decade, right? And I know that there has been minimal usage of them over that time, but I think it is starting to come back, and I think there's going to be more discussion coming about that over the next 12 months. I know that the one that is pushing it the most is Google's Flock, which I think is very interesting to us here at Telium as a way, specifically within the Chrome browser, of continuing to get similar reporting to what you did in the past. The final piece that we really want to hammer home, this ability of cross-departmental organization. We're kind of coining this around the idea of having a data center of excellence to own this. Bring in internal teams, external teams, so your partners, your service providers, right? Maybe that's your agency, maybe it's your SI, to work together and set expectations of how you're going to manage this data, both in the short and long term. What new technologies do you need to support this? Can you do some on trials, on POCs, right? Is there technology that you're going to be deprecating out of your stack that is no longer being utilized? So I know I went over a lot there just from a tips and tricks perspective, but and that none of this is easy, but I want to share, these are the obstacles that you're facing. And here's how to talk to some internal teams. So to reiterate, right? 1, get your managers up to speeds with changes, or your VPs or your executives. There is going to be a lot changing over the next 18 months. And as I continue to talk to our clients, our partners, other technologies, they are all saying the same thing, right? You're better off letting your teams know well in advance that challenges are coming than surprising them, because no manager likes a surprise. No executive likes a surprise saying, hey, you just wasted hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars chasing after this because you didn't let us know. Better to get them bought in to working with you. 2, cross-functional alignment. I know I've said that about 10 times already, but this whole change, and what I'm seeing is it's bringing media departments and IT departments much closer together. There's been several times recently where I've joined client calls that the media and the IT team has never actually met or talked. And that's because media used to go to IT to say, hey, deploy this pixel for me. Great, I'm just gonna now live in my third-party cookie universe, and we don't need to talk again. Now that you're talking of PII, that introduces a much closer relationship, because that might have been held by IT or the data teams, or maybe you have some access to it within your marketing operations organization. But for this full unified view, you need to work together within your organization. Finally, finding the right partners to help navigate this, right? There is going to be constant change. So make sure that you are aligning yourself and your organization with partners that are keeping pace with it and that are helping to set the market and the industry for how these changes are being presented, and that they're working with other leading providers to make sure you have the most full view of what is going on, and that they're giving you recommendations for how to adjust your strategies and the technology that you're using to empower this. Jake, anything else that you would add in terms of just some of the obstacles or any other points across some of those key changes that individuals should be looking at making? All right, I think we're good. So just to move on in terms of the benefits of all of these approaches, right? Jake, I will pass it back to you to jump into this here.
Sweet. Thank you, Travis. And I just realized I was on mute. I gave some really great feedback on the last ones, but we'll move on and we'll answer those into the questions. We've got some good questions going on as well. Benefits. We talked a lot about where we're headed or where we are, how we got here, how to kind of start to rethink and re-strategize. And I don't want to leave this webinar without talking about the benefits. There are real benefits to making the effort and building cross-functional alignment and thinking about how do we balance privacy and personalization and give these right experiences. Brands are doing it today. We gave 2 great examples from some TM clients, and there's many more. But I want to talk about benefits as well. Revenue growth, ultimately being able as a marketer to continue on doing the things that digital marketers are used to doing, but in a more privacy and customer focused way, going through and better defining customer attributes, looking across the journey, understanding behaviors, and even using machine learning to create some predictive audiences and anticipate behavior, ultimately hoping to improve conversions, upsell, cross-sell opportunities. Again, we mentioned we focused a lot on the privacy changes. That has not changed any consumer's ideal for personalization. Those are the ways to go through and really deliver value through your customers. And so doing so is ultimately going to result in revenue growth if you can get it right. And if you kind of go through and start thinking about this, much like ASICS is thinking about it, much like Lufthansa is thinking about it, and many others. Cost savings, ultimately automating and unifying first-party data practices, reducing some of the complexity of using data to relieve marketers, analysts, and developers of manual processes. There's many ways to go about solving this problem, but ultimately you want tools and strategies that help you relieve a lot of the burden of how do I go about getting data? How do I manage it? How do I ensure it's governed and useful? How do I combine all of this data from disparate sources? We can help you with that, obviously, at Telium, but those are things that help reduce the operational cost of getting to these strategies and these ideas as well, and ultimately using first-party data as your advantage. Increased agility. Agility is the name of the game, especially after the digital transformation period of 12 months that most of our businesses, I'd say, has been through over the COVID-19 pandemic. Being able to move and shift and be agile in the ways that you go about not only understanding customer behavior and signals, but going and activating and actioning on them, that is a competitive advantage. And doing so with first-party data allows you to be accurate in the ways that you go and activate that. And ultimately, the big thing is increasing trust. There is a value to and a differentiation point for brands that are trusted. You will get more information from your customers. You will go through and have better relationships and be able to easier build those first party relationships. And so we talked about some principles for setting those things up, but ultimately trust is going to increase lifetime value over customers because they feel confident in you as a brand going back and repeat purchasing, engaging with you, continuing to do business with you, and ultimately going back and really being, a trusted destination for doing whatever that they're trying to do. For ASICS, it was becoming a better runner. For Lufthansa, it was traveling. For whatever vertical that you might be in, it's good to think about how you go through and increase trust and ultimately increase customers coming back and doing business with you. So where can you learn more? We have some nice content and follow-up assets in the attachments that you can go through. Obviously, we want you to continue on the Masterclass series. Hopefully, this was a good stage setting for you as you go a little bit further. As Audrey said, we'll talk about DMPs. We'll talk about identity and kind of how a CDP fits in identity and all of the different identifiers that might be either going away or proposed by many different DSPs or many different browsers out there. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit more about value exchange and privacy, and we'll go deeper. But please continue on this Masterclass series. We hope today was helpful, and we want to continue to be helpful as we dive deeper on some of these topics. The definitive guide for customer data platforms. Obviously a CDP we feel is an important component to your first party data strategy. If you are just kind of diving into customer data platforms overall, that is a nice resource to get you from basics to best practices on your customer data. And then the State of the CDP 2021 report, really good insight from across verticals that we've put together in a single asset that allow you to kind of understand what exactly are marketers and analytics and developer professionals doing with CDPs, what problems are they solving, use cases are they going through, and the couple others that I'll mention here that aren't on this slide. We are going to hear from, again, on this topic and kind of going a bit further. Travis has brought a good amount of partners and customers together during our digital virtuosity event. That's our user conference where we'll talk and hear from partner perspective, not just Telium, but partner perspectives like Facebook and a couple of our customers going through on this topic and how others in the industry are thinking about it. And obviously you can either go in the attachments, or if you go to telium.com, that is front and center on our page because it's just around the corner for us. So with that, Travis, we've got some good questions here that I want to run through, and we do have just a few minutes left. I don't want to go too far over time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the slides here. Hey, Travis.
Hey, Jake.
Hey. All right. We've got some good questions, and I want to start with the first one that came in. We talked a lot about first-party data. How do you get to scale with first-party data? Obviously, we talked about and advertisers and marketers are used to scale being a benefit of the third-party cookie. How do you get that back, right? If I'm focusing on first-party first, how do I scale those audiences?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And so when we look at scale, as we said earlier, right, no longer can you just do, hey, I've got one cookie ID, I'm going to go to 30 cookie IDs. Yeah, that isn't really going to work anymore. So I think there's a couple avenues you can go down. The first being lookalike audiences within platforms like Facebook, like Google, are still going to exist. So you still have the ability to do that based on third-party demographic data that they might have, contextual data that they might have, if you're uploading an audience that is matched to a person. The second piece that you can also begin to look at is, hey, what kind of second-party data co-ops or other organizations do I want to partner with to expand at that ecosystem, right? And that's where it's really important to have that first-party data core that you can match with them on, because there's going to be very few matching keys that we are going to be able to use going forward, right? As I said about myself, there's only a few things that are consistent about me that aren't going to change from an onboarding perspective, right? My email addresses, my phone numbers, my terrestrial address hasn't changed in 3.5 years, although it's about to, right? Those are things that you can match based on, but there isn't a lot else, right? So you got to get that data and you have to have that value exchange.
I would say the big thing for me, if thinking back to my digital marketing days, is partners. How do I bring my data to partners that I'm working with, whether that's Facebook and Google ads and platforms where I'm spending a majority of my revenue and ad spend, in order to improve my chances of scale by bringing my data consented to them, in order to build some scale out and find people who look like my best customers, where I can go and retarget some of my best customers that haven't had a conversion event yet. Whatever that might be, I think partners are a big key in helping lead with first party data and scaling that effort out. Good question here. I'm confused by the term cookieless, which I think is a good question, because that is in the market quite a bit. Cookieless world. Does that mean cookies are going away forever, or first party cookies still around? Give us some definition of cookieless here, Travis.
Yeah. So third party cookies are going away. And as we said earlier, that is the ability for a vendor like Facebook or Google to set a third party identifier that they're able to pull data on, right? So that's what's going away. When we look at first party, that is under pressure, right? So I don't want to have any illusions that first party cookies are always going to be around, right? There's a little bit of differentiation there between an HTTP set and a JavaScript set cookie. Some of them are down to 24 hours inside of Safari, right? And so you've gone from a point of saying, hey, I have 365 if I'm in Chrome right now, and it's a personally set server-side cookie. Now, if you look at Apple, I'm down to 24 hours. So that is really different depending on the browser and where that sits. Personal prediction, not Telian prediction, but I think in the upcoming years, you will see any JavaScript begin to be blocked by Apple on a page. Nothing that they've said about it, just an assumption that I'm making and a prediction that I'm making that it's going to go towards it. So when we say cookieless, there could be a future where cookies do not exist, right? And that's what we mean by it. Today, third-party cookies are no longer going to be around. Jake, anything to add there?
No, not really. I think that's the good definition. We do hear cookieless a lot in the market, and even there's some confusion about third-party data going away. There will always be third-party data sets to leverage as long as somebody owns that data and it's been consented to, and there's opportunities to go in and leverage that in customer experience. It's third-party cookies really that are going away, and still that is a big impact, and obviously requires fundamental shifts in thinking. Last one here, Travis, that I think we have questions for, that we have time for. If we have not gotten to your question, we will follow up post-webinar, because there's a few other good ones here that I don't think we have time for. But you mentioned DMPs, you mentioned Adobe Experience Manager, and you mentioned Crux. What are major DSPs doing about some of this? Demand-side platforms.
Yeah, so a lot of the demand-side platforms are moving into a similar path that Facebook did with Facebook's conversion API. So I can tell you, I can't name names at this moment, but we are working with all of the other leading providers out there to build out their server-side capabilities. And what the biggest challenge a lot of them have is, how are they going to continue to match now that cookies are going away? So what are the match keys that they're using? What are the pieces that they're able to pull in? You have some people like Google coming out and saying, hey, we're not going to allow IP address anymore to be gathered through Chrome, and we're not going to use that for matching. So it's almost going to become a little bit of a browser base that they're looking at, saying, hey, what's Safari going to let me get? What's Firefox going to let me get? What's Google going to let me get? How do I match that based on the bid stream that I'm seeing coming through? So it's a slightly different strategy for each one and for each DSP. They're all moving down this, and I think you can expect to see everyone's going to come out with their server-side ingestion of data within the next 1 to 2 quarters.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting time to be a DSP. I think as you partner with DSPs, or as you continue to evaluate your investment in a DMP, and you look across all of the advertising and analytics partners across your stack, I think the best thing and the most strategic thing that you can do with your data is have flexibility to work across all of these tools and formats and functions. We'll be perfectly honest, things are still being figured out and shaken out into how this balance of privacy and personalization internet works. And I think the best asset that you have as a brand is functionality to go and work where you want, with the tools that you've invested in, and the manner that they want you to bring your data to them. And so the amount of flexibility that you have in your data platform is going to be extremely important and extremely valuable. And we kind of set ourselves as being a data first platform and CDP, and ultimately priding ourselves on being able to work across all of these different partnerships and all of these different technologies to allow you to working the way that you want to work. Okay, that is when we've got more questions coming in. We are at time. I'm going to go ahead just because I don't want to go too far up here, and we've been on for about 55 minutes. If we have not gotten to your question, we will get to it, I promise. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us. Where hopefully this was you're bringing away some thoughts and insights, or just some things to start thinking about. We hope you join us for the rest of the masterclass. We're going to go a little bit further into some of these topics. Travis, thank you so much, man, for spending your afternoon with us. And we will follow up with those who have questions offline. And please reach out to us if we can help and discuss further.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.